In 1986, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda, directed by the now famous Shigeru Miyamoto and the less renowned Takashi Tezuka. They didn't know it at the time, but this series would go on to become one of the most influential in video game history. As Breath of the Wild is now upon us, let's take some time to look back on how The Legend of Zelda became one of the greatest, longest-living franchises ever. 1986 was an interesting year for me. For starters, it was the year I was born. As a side note, it's also the year that The Legend of Zelda was released in Japan. The Legend of Zelda and I have grown up together, and as I've grown up and matured, it has too. The first entry into the Zelda franchise was met with unprecedented success. Aside from the Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt games, which were packaged with the NES, no game for that system sold more copies than The Legend of Zelda. The first to implement a save system, this game enabled players to try new things, to make longer journeys, take their time, and explore the world. It was a risky investment by Nintendo. In order to have a save system, each cartridge needed to have a small battery that would power an additional unit of RAM that could write the file. It was a bit more expensive to make, but was seen as necessary for the experience. The game was simply too big for players to be expected to beat it all in one go. Zelda involved a lot of trial and error. Players didn't know where to go right off the bat. There was a small cave where an old man would give you a sword before disappearing, but after that, the player was completely on their own. This was one of the original open-world games, a concept that largely got away from video games until the likes of Grand Theft Auto and Skyrim repopularized it. The Legend of Zelda sold 6.5 million copies. The very next year, Nintendo followed up the successful game with a direct sequel. There's one thing most developers do when creating sequels for things that caught on and sold millions of copies, and that is to not stray too far from the original. Nintendo, however, decided to change things up with this game. They incorporated a level system and other RPG elements. The overworld view was top-down, but there was a side-scrolling view for battles and dungeons. Going from a top-down view in one game to side-scrolling in another is a pretty big change. Nintendo also decided to take away some open-world aspects in order to tell more of a story. Zelda II was not received as well, and to this day is regarded as the Zelda game you can kinda just skip over. But it represents an ideology that still exists within Nintendo to this day: innovation. Nintendo rarely stays in the same spot for too long with anything. Zelda games, while all being remarkably similar in tone and story, are drastically different games. Nothing illustrates that better than the sequel to Legend of Zelda being Zelda II: The Adventure of Link. Another characteristic of Nintendo is that they usually take their time on things. While certain franchises like Mega Man, Sonic the Hedgehog, Call of Duty, or Assassin's Creed are, or were, able to release new games annually, Nintendo took a different approach. After 4 years of not having a third Zelda game, Nintendo finally made one for their new hardware, the Super Nintendo. A Link to the Past was released in Japan in 1991 and was a striking success. It reintroduced the top-down view as more of a three-quarters perspective and added more story elements and NPC interactions. Considered one of the greatest games of all time, A Link to the Past sold over 4.6 million copies, and, get this, was the only Zelda game to be released for the Super Nintendo. Nintendo was cementing their principles. They weren't going to dilute their franchises for short-term financial gain. They were dead set on making great games that inflated the value of their brands, and that takes time. Another console Zelda game would not be released for 7 years. A Link to the Past enabled players to experience more of the history of Hyrule. It also introduced us to the concept that Hyrule is changeable, that there are more than just one Link in Zelda. It introduced us to the dual world concept, the dark and the light. This has been a theme that Nintendo has held on to over the years. A Link to the Past was my first Zelda game, and as such, holds a very special place in my heart. After A Link to the Past, Nintendo decided to bring a Zelda title to their handheld gaming system, the Game Boy. Link's Awakening was released in 1993 and had a huge impact on the sale of the system. Taking a step backwards graphically was difficult for people who just wanted a Link to the Past sequel. But remember, that's not how Nintendo works. Link's Awakening sold 3.8 million copies and was loved by fans, even if they may have had a harder time appreciating the monochromatic visuals of the Game Boy. Just as 4 years had passed between the adventure of Link and A Link to the Past, Nintendo was in no hurry to follow up Link's Awakening with a new title. 5 years passed before the release of the next big Zelda game, the one that would change everything. Ocarina of Time was released on the Nintendo 64 in 1998. It had been in development for a long time and was initially only going to be available for the N64 disk drive. After realizing that the disc add-on wasn't going to catch on, they decided to port the game to a cartridge. A decision to make the game first-person was altered in order to differentiate between Link's child and adult states. Upon release, the game completely sold out, winning awards and being hailed as the greatest video game of all time, a title many still assign it today. Taking an already popular franchise and making it even bigger is something that very few companies are able to pull off. I fell in love with Zelda through A Link to the Past, but Ocarina of Time is where the true potential of this type of game started to be realized. The immersion I experienced in Ocarina of Time was unreal, and something I've rarely known since. The game sold more than 7.5 million copies on the N64, making it the highest-selling Zelda game at the time, and taking the series to new heights in the transition from 2D to 3D. The implementation of lock-on targeting is something we take for granted today, but was a key innovation that directly led to the continued success of Zelda and the many games that came after it. Ocarina of Time came out, Nintendo did something unique. Again, something they hadn't done before. They reused the assets of their previous game and made a brand new one in a similar style. Except, and only Nintendo can do this, it was somehow completely different. Majora's Mask is as strange a sequel to Ocarina of Time as The Adventures of Link was to the first Legend of Zelda. It relied on a 3-day system that had to be repeated over and over in order for Link to progress. The game has a creepy Alice in Wonderland vibe to it, and as vague an ending as you can get. It's tough to describe the game, but as a Legend of Zelda without Zelda, it's definitely an outlier in the series. Upon release, it sold less than half of what Ocarina of Time did, but considering the reuse of assets, engine, and other mechanics, it was still considered a great success for Nintendo. This is often listed as one of the better Zelda games, but fans wanting a Zelda with a new look and updated visuals would have to wait until the GameCube came out, and many of them did not like where that led them either. But before we move on to the next big console game, there are a few handhelds that came out first. First of all, we have Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. There was supposed to be a third game as well, and all 3 games were going to be assigned a different part of the Triforce. But it became difficult to connect all 3 games. When a player finished one game, they were given a code that they could then use in order to have a different experience in the other game. Adding a third one to the mix would have complicated things way too much, and only 2 games were made in the end. The games were well received and combined to sell almost 4 million copies. After that, we got Four Swords, packaged with a re-release of Link to the Past. Four Swords brought multiplayer co-op to Legend of Zelda. People loved it, and it helped to show some of the capabilities of the Game Boy Advance. And being able to play A Link to the Past on the go with the Game Boy was appealing to lots of people. But the next console game that Nintendo had in mind would challenge many fans of the series. In 2000, Nintendo showed a tech demo that included Link and Ganondorf fighting in what resembled a more realistic setting. Many people felt that this would be what the next Zelda title was going to look like, and there was no shortage of excitement for what Nintendo might have in store. Wind Waker was unveiled the next year to less than thunderous applause. It almost looked like a joke. Link was finally back in near chibi form in an attempt by Nintendo to rope in more casual fans. The result was that many just stopped playing. Wind Waker, as a brand new Zelda on brand new hardware, did not sell quite as well as Nintendo had hoped. In an attempt to bring in more fans, Nintendo ultimately lost many. which is a shame because this is one of the best games of all time and personally, my favorite Zelda. I'll admit, I also had a hard time getting past the presentation of Wind Waker at first, especially after seeing that tech demo a couple of years earlier. But there is incredible substance to this game. The vast oceans and the overall scale of the world was flooring. Considering the sales of the GameCube were low, Wind Waker actually sold okay in the end. Nintendo had a knee-jerk reaction to their fans that resulted in some pretty realistic imagery, but not before making another handheld game. Minish Cap came out for the Game Boy Advance in 2004 and sold 1.4 million units, making it one of the lowest-selling Zelda games in the series. This was seen as a trend from the fan fallout after Wind Waker, but Nintendo was preparing something special to help revitalize the franchise. After another 4 years without a console Zelda game, Nintendo was again ready to release the game Zelda fans had been waiting for, hoping to win back fans of Ocarina of Time who never played or plain didn't like Wind Waker. Twilight Princess was released for the Wii and GameCube in 2006 and went on to become the highest-selling Zelda game to date. The feeling of this game was more dark, more creepy, and more realistic in many ways. According to the sales data, this appears to be exactly what fans were waiting for. According to Nintendo? Well, to this day, Twilight Princess remains the darkest and most visually realistic game in the series. Nintendo decided that while Twilight Princess sold well and all, they didn't want Zelda to become a super realistic game series. Probably in part because Nintendo's hardware hasn't been able to compete in that regard since the GameCube. Twilight Princess was an amazing game that managed to keep the fun familiarity of a Zelda game while engaging in a more dark and dreary tone. People loved it, and in no time at all, Zelda was back on track. Well, at least for a little while. Nintendo continued to differentiate between their handheld games and their console games by using the Wind Waker graphics on the DS. Wind Waker Link has bigger eyes and is better proportioned for a lower resolution, smaller screen game. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks both came out for the DS before the next console Zelda game would be made. They each did very well, with Phantom Hourglass passing 5 million copies sold, making it the 4th highest-selling Zelda game of all time. Like with Majora's Mask, Spirit Tracks used assets from Phantom Hourglass in order to make a similar yet distinct sequel. This enabled them to have the next game out within just 2 years, as opposed to the usual development cycle. Spirit Tracks also gave Zelda a more engaging role, where she can actively work with Link to defeat the enemy, as opposed to simply just being a captured princess. Now we come to Skyward Sword, where we saw yet again Nintendo doing more unprecedented things. First off, the art style was a mix between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. Instead of a chibi Link, we got a well-proportioned character, but other than that, everything looked quite unreal. Some of that was due to their decision to deal with draw distance by making everything in the distance look like a Casen painting. This was a very creative move, but came about as a way to deal with the Wii's graphical limitations. The story was more of a focus for this game, which led to some pretty linear gameplay. I think the story of Skyward Sword is great and was well delivered, but here's where we get to talk about something else that I haven't really talked about much in the other games: the controls. Zelda games are well known for being incredibly polished, especially for their time. Nintendo pays great attention to ensuring the controls for their games are as good as they can be, but the Zelda series specifically is on a whole nother level. Playing these games makes most others feel like unfinished piles of junk. Nintendo tried something new with Twilight Princess for the Wii by enabling the sword controls to be activated by swinging the Wii remote. This was fun, even though I didn't always feel up to swinging my arms when playing games late at night. But with Skyward Sword, we got motion controls in an even greater dose. It was the very center of this entire game. If you weren't a fan of motion controls, you probably hated it. I feel like they were implemented quite well, for what it's worth, though my ultimate opinion is that they shouldn't have been implemented at all. As motion control games go, Skyward Sword is among the best, but I could never get past how stupid it made Link look when he was constantly running around holding his sword like that. The biggest advancement that came from Skyward Sword came in the form of its story. A Link Between Worlds came as a surprise to many, as it's the first game to revisit a much older one in the franchise. It takes place in the Hyrule of A Link to the Past, but included the ability for Link to move around as a wall painting. It was a successful revisiting of the world from a former game, and fingers crossed they attempt to do more of this. It sold over 3 million copies and led right up to the next Zelda game. No, not that one. Can we not talk about this one? Can we skip it? Perfect. And at last, we come to Breath of the Wild, or as Shigeru Miyamoto calls it, Buresu obu za Wairudo. Once again, Nintendo showed off a tech demo that involved a very real-looking Link that many felt would resemble the next Zelda game. I think at this point, we all know not to assume that anymore. This game seems to have the combined aesthetic from Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, though it's clearly meant to imitate Japanese anime from the likes of Hayao Miyazaki. Motion controls are gone, except when aiming a bow and arrow, which is perfect. Now, admittedly, I have only played about 20 minutes of Breath of the Wild at E3, but at the very least, it is a game that I have played. The controls are perfect, the environment is breathtaking, and the story seems to play an important role in this awesome open-world adventure. Many say that Zelda is taking a page out of the Elder Scrolls book, and that may be true to an extent, but the fact is, Zelda started out as a vast open-world game well before the first Elder Scrolls. Breath of the Wild is more Zelda going back to its roots than it is anything else. The series has come full circle. From the figure-it-out-yourself mentality to incessant hand-holding, we've finally returned back to where we started. This was an unexpected move from Nintendo. Music seems to be minimal, and the world is sparse. Link can wear whatever clothes he wishes. We now have voice acting, and our former hand-holding system of linearity is only a shadow of what it used to be. Nintendo is innovating. Things that have been in Zelda for decades aren't making an appearance in this game, and other things that haven't been in Zelda for decades are coming back. Things are changing, and what this change will bring has me beyond excited. And there you have it, an incomplete history of the Legend of Zelda series. There's a lot to go over, and I could talk for days about each one of these entries, but for expediency, I skipped over Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, despite its invaluable contributions to Zelda lore. The fact is, there are a lot of Zelda games, and it's uncommon for one not to be extremely good. This series has meant so much to me, and I owe much of what I've become in life to Shigeru Miyamoto and his creations. The Legend of Zelda has a remarkable history, and here's to hoping it continues that way for a long, long time.